SCP-7140. There is a word in the old Deva tongue, Zafia. Literally, it means a change resulting from something being destroyed. One might refer to the soil fertilized by the decay of a dead animal, for instance, or the scorched earth succeeding a wildfire. There is a distant focus, I think, and this is far from an uncommon observation, on perpetuation and continuity with an altered form rather than annihilation in Devite culture, on changing to adapt rather than being dismantled. Look at how contemporary writers describe the death of notable people or the rise in important cities of war. Now, the Devite verb for kill is only ever passive, and it comes from an older, antediluvian root literally meaning to be remade. We recall the notorious quip from the famed Deva historian Abtastar Lizvik, recorded the day Grand Tarsis Ion broke the siege of Devon. Again, the immortality of the timeless empire is reassured by tragedy. Historians are astounded to this day by the indifference of the Deva to death and devastation. All are merely setback. Even when the army of broken chains battered down the citadel walls of the capital, sacked the crown jewel of imperial hegemony, and crucified the matriarchs, even as the city collapsed around her and the slaves rose up in open revolt, Elizabeth did not take time to lament, or even for a moment consider the possibility of the collapse of the Devite Empire. She only reaffirmed that immortality promised to the Deva by the fading Starlit Covenant, embracing not only her own death, but that of every other imperial aristocrat in the city with unflinching trust. Most forebodingly of all, she may have been right. After all, the Covenant fades in our world. In this current iteration of the Prime Timeline, in this current record of Devite history, this sort of perspective on death is daunting to us. But it may make total sense to a culture who understands perpetuity is sooner or later guaranteed by forces outside time. As any Devite revivalist today will surely tell you, the Covenant promise to the Chronicle will prove all things dead are made reborn. Another thing about the Devite language, it should be pretty easy to guess by now. They have no word for end. Containment of SCP-7140 is to be oriented toward preventing its completion in order to ensure a full performance remains impossible for as long as can be maintained. The basic policies surrounding SCP-7140 are not to be altered until and unless the project achieves 100% completion, at which point they will become irrelevant. All precise details concerning the composition of or steps to carry out the thaumaturgic working known as the Sacrament Aleph are to be universally suppressed. Sufficiently precise knowledge of the ritual has, according to the best knowledge Foundation misinformation and disinformation authorities, been effectively purged from the general unveiled population and isolated by Foundation authorities utilizing advanced selective expungement intervention tactics. Such instructions are to be stored on an encrypted drive in an anti-memetically safeguarded anti-scrying informational quarantine unit at an undisclosed secure facility. Authorized Foundation personnel assigned to SCP-7140 are to be permitted to knowledge of Sacrament Aleph from this vault exclusively on strict need-to-know basis. Once knowledge of Sacrament Aleph has been used by the authorized individual to accomplish the task for which it has been required and is no longer necessary, they are to be administered to a targeted Class B amnestic in order to expunge the details of the rite from memory. Should the Mysterium ever reach 100% completion, the immediate prerogative of SCP-7140 containment is to shift towards K-Class prevention. At this point, informational obfuscation of Sacrament Aleph to the subveil population is to be considered no longer necessary. K-Class prevention procedures for SCP-7140 constitute a drastically increased security presence in the Himalayan mountain region, including the immediate and permanent stationing of extensive military and surveillance assets, as well as the crucial implementation of a far stricter ban barring the presence or activity of independent cultists in the area. Station Foundation assets are to have an automatic kill on-site permission for any group or individual unauthorized by the Foundation or GOC encountered attempting to build ritual structures within a designated Himalayan area. The Foundation has already entered negotiations with the GOC, as well as the national governments of India, China, Nepal, and Bhutan, to develop a plan of action in the event this phase of containment becomes necessary. Certain elements of Composer Alexander Strabane's occult work, particularly relating to the composition known as the Mysterium, have been substantially permitted to the veiled public in accordance to Project Pantheon disinformation protocols. Such doctored representations of the facts surrounding SCP-7140 presented to the public are to emphasize the permanently unfinished nature of the Mysterium, as to discourage by all possible means the discovery or implementation of Sacrament Aleph to any element of the civilian population. SCP-7140 is a Blavatsky-class hypersigil, encompassing the ritual creation and performance of Russian composer Alexander Strabane's Mysterium, an unfinished musical composition in progress from 1903 until Strabane's death until 1915. Deliberately occult in its themes and aesthetics and created with significant aid from anomalous methods, it is believed the Mysterium was intended to function as a massive eschatological working when performed. The hypothetical completion of SCP-7140 apparently represents an XK-class end-of-the-world or universe-localized ZK-class reality failure scenario. SCP-7140 is considered complete upon the conclusion of the uninterrupted performance of the entire Mysterium, which is apparently to be 7 full days and nights in length. For a performance to be considered valid, it supposedly must take place in a specially constructed ritual and sanctuary complex, which is to be built somewhere in the Himalayan mountains, and include a detailed regimen of specific sensory aids to the musical composition involving such elements as elaborate light shows, dispensations of incense and procession. The effects of an inaction SCP-7140 are not precisely known, as what little is certain about the object has been derived from second-hand and extra-universal sources. However, it is apparent that the alternate conscious life on Earth becomes somehow telepathically aware of SCP-7140 upon the initiation of a valid performance, indicating the immediate onset of an at least BK-class broken masquerade scenario. As the Mysterium is an unfinished piece and its composer only produced music for a small fraction of its total duration, performance of SCP-7140 to full completion is presently impossible. Developing the Mysterium to the point of completion is therefore the main objective of SCP-7140 self-perpetuation. SCP-7140 primarily furthers itself for the dissemination of TW-722146, hereafter referred to as the Sacrament Aleph. Sacrament Aleph is a thaumaturgic working which can be performed by an individual or group of individuals as a printed sheet music copy of Strabane's Mysterium. After the application of the Sacrament Aleph, the text is considered to be charged or enhanced by it. The precise nature of the ritual of this enhancement are unimportant, and left unspecified to prevent necessary awareness of both the minutiae in Sacrament Aleph. When an unfinished copy of the Mysterium enhanced with Sacrament Aleph comes in contact with any fluid suitable for writing, particularly human blood, its contents all typically expand to include additional sheet music beyond what was previously included in the piece. Once all available fluid is used, all other SCP-7140-A instances will be retroactively altered to match that updated contents of the expanded copy, and the effects of Sacrament Aleph will expire on the original. Foundation occultists have determined that Sacrament Aleph shares an occultional origin markers known as the Ahriman-type thaumatifs, rare ritual components found in some temporal workings which allow for these retroactive reality alterations, with other Foundation-contained objects including SCP-140 and SCP-2140. Since the discovery of SCP-7140 by the Foundation in 1921, an estimated containment breaches ranging in scale from negligible to major have been assembled. The most up-to-date sheet music copy of Mysterium is known to an estimated 42% completion. Since implementation of the present policy of strict informational curfew around Sacrament Aleph in 1987, SCP-7140's rate of approaching completion has been cut substantially, nearly to 2/5 the original rate by most estimates. According to the personal sketches and notes belonging to Alexander Straban, the original intended effect of Mysterium was to be hasten or otherwise incur the natural destruction of the universe to allow for a subsequent rebirth of an ostensibly more spiritually pure one accompanied by a new cosmological epoch. This was apparently achieved by ritual means involved in the performance of one piece. Burst of Interest 7140 and its contemporaries often described a 7-day synthetic festival of music, lights, and other material and spiritual ecstasies, immediately followed by a full-scale eschaton, which would result in the replacement of human beings by a more spiritually sophisticated species. Millenarian beliefs resembling these were common in the late 19th and early 20th century occultism, and synthesized in the extant canon of Western esotericism with the Dharmic faiths of Asia, most famously including Theosophy, which was an apparent influence of person of interest 7140's work. While planning the performance of his piece, Scriabin had this to say of artistic and esoteric intent with the Mysterium. There will not be a single spectator, all will be participants. The work requires special people, special artists, and a completely new culture. The cast of performers includes an orchestra, a large mixed choir, an instrument with visual effects, dancers, a procession, incense, and rhythmic textural articulation. The cathedral in which it may take place will not be one of single type but of stone, but will continually change with the atmosphere and the emotion of the Mysterium. This will be done with the aid of mist and lights, which will modify the architectural contours. In the April of 1915, person of interest 7140 died of sepsis in a mosque-style apartment with the Mysterium left incomplete, having only completed 72 pages of the piece Prelude, a symphony titled Perfectory Action. SCP-7140 in its current form began shortly thereafter, although the precise time cannot be verified. It is believed that the origin of SCP-7140 lies with anomalous components of the piece which already existed in some form during its composition. Specifically, most contemporary occultists believe it likely represents the will of one or many extra-dimensional entities person of interest 7140 contacted to provide him with the necessary resources and abilities to create composition. Many have deduced that person of interest 7140 at some point entered into a Type 9 Faustian interplanar contract permitting the lending party to take completion of the Mysterium into its own hands should he perish before the composition was completed. It is credibly theorized that extra-universal entity with the ability to synthesize Harman-type thaumatifs could have included the Mysterium to complete itself in a fashion permitted per SCP-7140, thus ensuring its eventual implementation and upholding the bargain according to the entity's vested interest. It is unclear whether the Mysterium has, in nature, retained its original and artistic intent following the takeover of SCP-7140 to complete the piece. Person of interest 7140 appeared to have believed his writings that the transition from one universe to another was a natural process to be embraced rather than a painful or devastating event to be dreaded. A distinctly humanistic view unlikely to be shared by alien paranatural forces. However, according to the post-mortem information required from Multi-Foundation Coalition Signatory Universe 9789 E7DW 908-Z-ZK-7140, holy fuck, that's on. It appears versions of Mysterium completed by the influence of SCP-7140 definitely do retain intended occult capability to incur or fully realize an ultimate eschatological event. As this universe lost all contact with the Meta Foundation immediately following its destruction, it remains unknown whether this universe was in fact rebirthed into a distinct reconstituted form subsequent with the climax of the Mysterium Eschaton. For lack of this information, this universe remains currently classified as a defunct reality. Here's a little secret. Independent of any prospective K-class scenario, universes are technically composed to have lifespans. Yes, finite ones. I'm not talking about the Big Crunch or the Big Rip or any heat death or any theoretically possible universe-wide cosmic disintegration. I mean incarnating and retarding lifespans of those like mortal men. One cosmic life after another. Multiple iterations of the same universe, cyclically reoccurring in the same continuous time stream. Even Delta T possesses Delta T possesses nowhere near the capability for it to be a regular problem for us, of course, being as we are now in the existential terms, but according to the best models we have, it's true nonetheless. Now, technically isn't considered proper practice to still teach the cosmic egg theory. Maybe I've been spending too much time in the 14th century, but there really isn't no better way to explain it simply. The totality of each cosmos emerging from just one single point each, every variation the result of innumerable branching possibilities out from essentially the same base. When one's time is up, its moribund remains collapsed to the edge once again, this time bound to hatch in a different world. Sometimes the most skillful or dangerous time criminals will try to reboot the universe still in its natural prime or at their own terms. There are mechanisms for such thing, but I wouldn't worry. Even after the worst storm, we always wash up ashore. That is the lifeblood of Delta T, our raison d'etre. We always pick up the pieces, we always find ourselves, all the way to the other side of time. A excerpt from Dr. Thaddeus Zynax, Director of Temporal Anomalies Department. When we talk about K-class reversal, we're not usually talking about going back in time to stop every single apocalypse before it happens. Doing so will be reckless, and in the vast majority of cases, counterproductive. Some timelines of the infinity we manage are going to spiral downwards, sooner or later. That they do is paramount to the coherence of greater time stream in our canonical bundle. It is a cosmic survival of the fittest, essentially, so we are not talking about preventing timelines from becoming doomed when this is their predestined fate, but about providing advance and more into the foundation in every world not already predestined to collapse, so they can be well informed as possible. This is usually the greatest extent of our retrotemporal intervention. It might not be glamorous, but it's the most we can do or should do. You, as a temporal agent, are essentially a servant of fate. As a general rule, you should not go against it. You should not risk the stability of everything to save a world destined in its own perception to end, since our business both benefit and compromise made terms in terms of human life are definitely infinite anyhow. However, we should not confuse any timelines which fade into instability with universes which reiterate and reincarnate themselves. Perhaps it should be important to note, particularly as you are in the business of upholding the prime time stream, that no universe ever permanently ceases to exist at the end of its own natural line. No matter how the apocalypse faced, so long as temporal continuity is preserved, it is only ever reconfigured, remade into something else. Never is it destroyed. Full retcons are for retrotemporal cascade and swan fiat only. Timelines may fade or go doomed into the dark night of the temporal void, but worlds never do. They only develop and redevelop themselves forever. An extract from Dr. Alice Forth, Director of Department of Temporal Anomalies. What you need to understand is about the occultists of the 19th and 20th century is that they were incredibly gullible geniuses. What you need to know about their history accordingly is that it was fundamentally driven by tragedy. Twice they wronged themselves, and for all their ingenuity and groundbreaking progress, twice their foolishness spelled their own doom. First, they were fooled by the rapacious urge of conquest, of global expansion, empire. Second, they were fooled by vain, wishful thought, or hope. That would never come again in their time in history as imperiled as theirs. That there would never be another effusion of blood greater or more terrible than the Great Occult War. For all the talk of the major war in Europe, which pervaded the public consciousness, the formative era of normalcy in Asia was hardly less chaotic. With British mismanagement and its cluttered, defective zenith, a theosophical society ascendant rose to find itself almost solely in command of institutional occultism in colonial India. The Theosophists were, to their credit, remarkably egalitarian for a contemporary occultist movement, even opposed ideologically to the root of the empire's dominion or domination over nature, and many times literally to the colonial authorities. With the occultists of the West looking beginning to look east, carrying the old sectarian squabbles of Europe in them, India's new class of wizards were far from perfect. With their time in the sun, they made many strides toward esoteric progress. Karman theory had its roots in this time period, for example, as do our first explorations of the Akiva field, and although the concept of root races is archaic and unsavory to say the least, the advances made in channeling ancestral magic could not be refuted. But this era also saw grave steps to be taken into which could not be undone after the rise of unified thaumatology in the tradition. The mass exodus of practicing Western tradition occultists to the east to take part in any of 1,000 pseudo-dharmic spin-off sects of varied intentions and degrees of honestly created a Wild West environment and an unexplored culture, where malpractice and misreplicated rites were allowed to run wild. It laid down a legacy of Orientalism that would persist in the field of esoteric anthropology for a century at least, and opened the floodgates to hucksters and frauds of all stripes. Not everyone who came sought genuine enlightenment. Many were content to use a rise of interest and excitement to enrich themselves, charging expat Westerners for their bottom dollar of shoddy magic dressed up as superficial mystery advertised as the secrets of the Orient. In 1876, for example, a shady mage going by the name of Master Yatrick, sound familiar, set up a shop in Calcutta. He was a quack, of course, a liar mostly, and a fraud definitely. But he also served forces more malicious than his own bottom line. With a combination of charisma and psychic control, he amassed a fanatical cult of personality. By 1900, over 600 of Yatrick's pupils had let their blood in the thorn of these 7 thorn branches, a powerful Deivite artifact around which he had mobilized his cult. Their genetic material was instrumental in the creation of phytotomic entities he would release in 1901 bioterrorist attack which killed more than 100 in the Artan region of Burma. Now in a new age, our oracles so unprepared us for, we still see the allure of the exotic and the cult uses both sides of the veil to take advantage of the desperate masses looking for a miracle. The king in those lavish robes doesn't always wear crimson horns, but he's always insidious and manipulative. A time-honored tradition says, "Beware the magic who offers the whole world and promises nothing." I would know. The wizard who taught me that old proverb happened to be one. The second shortcoming of Thamic forefathers was the apocalyptic outlook of so much of the occult community seemed to have their own world. Both during and after the Sixth Occult War, its roots lie in the first cause: expansion, an empire in a world too small, too fragile for so many growing so aggressively. I keep fucking up on the words. I keep fucking up on the order. Oh my god. If we too had lived through it, the experience must have seemed apocalyptic. The ultimate test of every ritual developed in the preceding centuries or more, all of them turned by human hands against their fellow men. Harrowing, no doubt, but absolutely enough to traumatize any of the embattled mages for life 10 times over, especially if you include the devastating aftermath of the war. But the anxieties of a traumatized generation are not in fact the will of the world. Despite the desperate attempts of the early visionaries of normalcy to make it so by bending their nature to their vision. Of course, we know more about the world now than they did then. Now we can look back on the ruins of 100 human and pre-human civilizations stretching epochs back in time, and rest assured that no final blow will ever bring Earth into a cataclysmic end, only shifts in its balance. But then, when the last corners of Earth are finally being explored and the frontier receding more than each day, it seemed like the end could have been at hand any day. A mass hysteria of this sort, at least in some form, should not be surprising for this most tumultuous era of occult history. Few should be shocked, for instance, that the Great Occult War had the most confirmed end-of-the-world prophecies of any historical event before or since. That beats out the Seventh, the Bakhtin, the Impasse, Y2K, anything Nostradamus ever said, all of it. So they let their imaginations run wild with that apocalyptic fear, and not all too often let it influence them as they constructed the magical architecture which still underpins our modern world. And yet still every portent of doom, every prophet of apocalypse was wrong, and they always will be. The world keeps spinning because, as the Great Occult War and every other catastrophe in the line of a millions proved, no event so destructive as to precluded from being transformative. There is one lesson from all of this that the Foundation's K-class contingency teams to learn, in my opinion, that the world never ends, it only evolves. That was an excerpt from Dr. Crowley, Chair of Department of Applied Esotericism. Great then given another excerpt from a book called The Parable of the Eldest, which reads, "Dear Diary, today was Yoran Lusan's day. We woke up early to get ready for the feast at the temple, all the way to the other side of town. It felt like the whole village was there. Father Raymond, Father Agenrat, Elder Yemna, and the Satora sisters, Old Man Chet. It was nice to be in one place, but to be honest, I'm not sure they ever really gotten used to me. It's just the sort of looks I get. I don't really blame them, it must be the only human they've ever seen. Most ordothons couldn't name a human with a pistol to their head, except maybe St. Barlow and a few other church figures. especially not in these parts. We're a small town, on an asteroid hardly 60 miles across, so we don't get much news from the outside world, especially not from Earth, under that stodgy iron veil. We also don't get many visitors, which is actually a nice side view for my next topic. A visitor came to town today, from who knows where. Preacher. He certainly said he was true faith, maybe he was Ordathon after all, but a weird sect of Ordathon I'd never heard of before. So their numbers were on the up and up, though. He kept trying to tell us about some new god I'd never heard of, garbled in some awful pagan chant. Tilad Yap Apsu Althoth Sag or Shulpnel Canthanid translates to something about an outsider joining the Holy Seventh in their crusade. Father Raymond told me. He said the preacher was speaking in an eldritch tongue we couldn't pronounce, and the god whose word he spread was a cursed one sworn off by the Ordathons. Told me to avoid him, and strangers liked him. People didn't like him. There was some shouting, some harsh gesturing, and some curses, and eventually he left. Ordathons who love Craftians don't get along, Father tells me. A long history of religious warfare and strife, communities across Orion's arm torn apart by theological debates over the nature of the Voru, or whether the Atoth is. The true faith is very clear about what our personhood means. We never give up fighting for it. We do not tolerate nihilism or doubt about the world of the soul. So you can understand why the elders wouldn't take kindly to a stranger spewing Thagden speech in Ordathon town, whether his intentions or affiliations actually were. Old Man Kahet said the thing that stuck with me most, though, he was trying to let the preacher go away. If a third Hightoth comes, it won't be no 7-ton star lullaby that will sing the end of the world. He talked the man down, almost shouting, "It'll be your treachery, your foolishness." I almost couldn't imagine it. A third Hightoth. It's difficult to imagine there could ever really be another. That we could all just be gone or somehow transformed beyond recognition. Like the faith teaches us about the sons of the old world, we would be strange. Banished visitors in another. Despite all that talk about our world and the old world and church, I never really considered a third. All that worked the Holy Seventh to save the cosmos from those 9 teeth of void, set back to square one again. And if that's ever so, who would be left to protect us? Tonight when I was asleep, I snuck out and went to the temple again, all the way to the other side of town. Jupiter was high in the sky, almost blindingly in view. I crept into a temple, eyed the great bloody red banner, still hanging high on the wall, knelt down before the etched heptalogen star and prayed. I don't know how long, almost an hour maybe. I don't know if I'll feel any better, to be honest. We're then given a section called the Parable of the Middle. It involves 2 characters, in a classic theater-like style. One named Arlecchino, wearer of the hapless mask, and Petruchio, wearer of the hysterical mask. Petruchio starts with, "Can we retire at last? I fear it grows late. Nevertheless, the fixed stars doth torture and withhold the time by their stillness." Arlecchio turns his back to Petruchio, produces a carmine tone from the shelf to his left, and descends down the ladder. "But what stellcraft doth this one contain, O brother?" Petruchio responds with, "Why doth thou vex me with these endless questions, youngest brother Arlecchino? How am I to know?" Arlecchino responds with, "Surely you tend to do something, wise scholar brother. Satiate my curiosity." He then hands over the tome, and Petruchio drops it open with a gloved tendril. He says, "Speaketh here of pruning of worlds, methinks, that they are all become entangled in an endless song, as many scholars have come to believe, whose verses are finite but repeated. And if one realm grows reticent to fill its purpose, may it be eased in the final bed and back to the natal crib." Arlecchino questions, "For whom?" Petruchio answers, "The gods of the inky dark above and below, no doubt. For this would be the first and most primal spark of magic, remanifest, where a new ceremonial livery in preparation for the final mystery." Arlecchino responds, "Dead worlds. But the Master teaches us that all dreams and Algada is not dead. Is this not so?" Petruchio answers, but the refused worlds beyond our walls." The backwaters outside the city, there are many. If the harmony of those spheres doth so permit, one dreadful lullaby shall be a final whisper of our own grand story. It has happened many times, and so do the libraries of our four human lords teach to many a world. Our Latino questions once again, why so? Doth the judge with his magic purge the worlds of impure and the unworthy? Or doth some farmsman harvest the fruits of the cosmic tree whencesoever they might ripen? Or a woodsman toll to the forest? Our Latino responds with, those reddened deeds of which you speak belong to the heretic of the worm, and do not concern us. That scoundrel conqueror is bound the governors of this realm to service, to swing a swan song in their dooms. Our Latino responds with, I see. It is dreadful, eldest brother of mine, I must say. Patricio responds with, indeed, but we are watchers only, and those who rejoice, for all mortals live and die in the harmony of the spheres. In the antecedent we are, stagnant in thy constitution, the mockery of their own divine motion. Theirs is the sun and the moon, ours is never where and never when. Writhe and revel we shall, but consummate filth their perfect masquerade for now and forever. Our Latino says one final thing. Will not in black Aldada days of worldly come to an end, O brother? Patricio responds with, never in Aldada, brother. For with final breath we do not breathe, nor with free enemies live, and not need die to be dead. He then gestures up to the observatory window which crowns the library's main hall. Look above you and see, ours are stillborn stars in the deathly sky. They both exit stage left. And that stage instructions from the actual Mysterium, I think. What the fuck else would it be, honestly? We then have a third parable, this one reading the parable of the youngest. One told by the devout imperial servant, Tazi al-Hakal recounts a common story in which a Deva girl on apprenticeship to become a priestess, once told by her master that the covenant between the Deva and the king ensures a perpetuity and immortality for the empire, challenges the senior and priestess to predict the future in order to prove her claims. The priestess replies that she lacks portent, usually the entrails of a slain enemy, and that the covenant only guarantees but does not tell the king's secrets, reminding her that to doubt the covenant is hearsay in the imperial cult. The apprentice is respectably unsatisfied by this answer and is dismissed into her day's studies. The following night, ironically, the priestess receives an actual revelation from her dreams. This vision, in which Ab-Hakal agrees, represents both real future events in some form, and is transcribed as such. There is a congregation of angelic swans in a pond at the base of the great tree. Each swan wears a holding number of facets, corresponding to the realms over which they hold the title. Their seraph wings are likewise. Some have tens, some hundreds. They are lords and marquises proud beyond their station, fickle lesser gods. Each holds sway over the precious myth that has her own fiefdom world, painting its truths, ordering its stories. The angels converse in various alien tongues, clash and trumpets, interspersed with haunting celestial song. There is a trembling from the exposed end of the tree's roots, and then the opening of a way from one of them. A full earthquake resounds from under the nothing, shaking the serene pond. A clawed appendage feels its surroundings from the other side of the aperture. The fided, distant limb of a lowly and depraved scavenger god. It emerges, fixing a cyclopean eye in one of the angels, all 7 pupils dilating and scintillating and revolving as if to communicate with some alien signal. There is a brief silence, another quake. A horde of leviathans prop open the way and rush out. Beasts forgotten whose ire makes sailors lost to the depths, profanities of which many limb imagining and visage, warlords astride ghastly, thunder-lighted orchid steeds, their sharpened blades and embezzled hesim, desolation. The whole legion was not even finished their march out by the time the first angel was captured. In the darkest court, the deepest pit of some abyssal hell, the Leviathans present their bound prizes of war. Their return is greeted with a triumphal cacophony of blood-clotted feuds and gnashing mouth harps, swans of syncophatic trash gods looking down opportunistically on the ceremonial welcome with the expectation of carnage. The birds are caged, they are derided, ridiculed. Fools, all believers in stories, but they are not, in fact, to be slaughtered. One by one, the enthroned king breaks their wings and pins them to jagged boards with a spear, binds each angel to a crucifixion. He has a deal to uphold, immortal, but more importantly, he has found a way to bring all those stories to an end at last. He is not a sway over how each fable ends, holds not the deed to each little world, but between them, they do. He will make them write one last song, their swan's song, all of them, to rebirth their precious world in his own image. And once they have done the work, and once he has the duly facilitated in all those worlds, the mortal will sing it. Hyperdimensional Predatory Memorandum. As of present, Central Normalcy Authority Iteration 7D8823 NFD 8FGB 9675521 HMD 99 2017 46C, a time stream Telemetro Tango Rubella Delta Gold, has declared solvency of its indigenous reality to the Meta Foundation. RSTT Delta T has conducted an independent inquiry and verified that this specific universe localized DK class event represents an authorized development determined to DW16's prime time stream, and it's required to prevent destabilizing deviation from its ordained sequence of events. Consequently, any attempt to have reconstitution by Goldbaker and Associates has been refused. The following report has been compiled as to the causes of the K-class event realization, which led to 9789 E7DWD 908-Z-ZK-7140 solvency. The ultimate cause for the K-class event realization appears to be standard escalation of an anomaly roughly fitting the archetypal MSCP timeline adjusted 7140 at around T330 hours. Indigenous Foundation elements reported becoming aware of extensive ritual activity on or around Mount Annapurna. Which could not be decisively stopped before the full onset of the catastrophe due to some form of solvent detection shielding. Upon the initiation of the anomaly, a ritual complex resembling a temple or sanctuary inside the mountain was revealed, previously unknown to Normalcy authorities, likely due to the Central Normalcy Authority's iteration comparative lack of divination-based surveillance ability. It is believed this complex was built to precise specifications by occult groups motivated to the enaction of SCP-7140. At T0 hours, a stationed RCT Delta T agent placed him on the crowd attending occultists to verify the ritual transpired. To the conclusion mandated by Prime Time Scene reported hearing an old Davite incantation consistent with a lullaby for young children. Immediately followed by the effusion of blood onto a written copy of the ritual upon an altar. A uniform eschatological escalation sequence began immediately thereafter. The initial onset of the ritual associated with Object 7140 was apparently associated with the global telepathic signal, whereupon the entire world population became simultaneously both anomalously aware of the details of the ongoing eschatological event and anomalously convinced of its general beneficence and necessity. Within T100 hours, a mass silent transmission, apparently on global in scale, is detected by the Panopticon global surveillance assets worldwide. Foundation Command in the Himalayas determines the recently discovered ritual as the origin point after the mass transmission. Hereafter, Truth Unveiled apparently leads a substantive sector of the global population to embark on immediate pilgrimages to the mountain ritual site, which had persisted across several days of ritual. A spine-affected anomaly against which C and AI apparently could mount no lasting resistance means such of the documentation indigenous to their universe regarding object SCP-7140 has either been deleted or deliberately corrupted by physically compromised individuals or was written by compromised individuals in the first place. Although relevant documentation was automatically disseminated to the Meta Foundation and member organizations successfully, as per Stipulation 3.1, this promising effect unfortunately renders most of it useless. Although the Indigenous Foundation initially attempted military action to force the increase in the mass of practicing eschatologists to desist K-class initiation, mass anomalous compulsion likewise eventually prevented their agents from enacting any serious resistance. At T-140 hours, O5 Domain authorizes immediate aerial bombardment of ritual site by MDF and formal military assets. At T-220 hours, attempted aerial bombardment of Himalayan ritual site begins. Upon approaching 100 kilometers, the site anomalous impulsion overwhelms everything, and selected mass assets refuse to complete the attack, returning to their stations. It is beautiful. It is not the end. We will try in vain to stop the inexorable tide of nature, fearing it may be, but it is not. Nothing will ever be the end. At T-340 hours, the second team is assembled of exclusively ultra-high CRV pilots for aerial bombardment. At T-430 hours, no substantive difference in result. Upon approaching a ritual site, all military assets desist attack. Radius beyond which impulsion becomes overwhelmingly has apparently grown from 100 to 120 kilometers. You must embrace it. Mother Earth beckons, Father Time calls. This time for all of us, together as children under the sun. The pattern of failed attempts at resistance continues intermittently according to the surviving documentation. Within the first 24 hours, it is believed that CNAI is effectively neutralized. In the ensuing days, a number of increasingly dramatic events consistent with symptoms of Type 5 or Type 6 SCP occur. Note the consistent extension textual corruption. At T-2400 hours, continuous increase in average marginal human coefficient far beyond natural limits, the ascent towards our greatest aspiration begins, centered in the ritual site, and eventually taking effect globally. We will see you in the stars. For now, we become them. At T-3500 hours, the first angel of the new world is here. It is dark and sharp-scaled. Its fins a shiny back, its tail on and barred with a talon and almighty anchor in its tip. Attached on the Foundation facilities leads to massive casualties, more rage and desperation, more lashing out in vain. Our imperious playwrights, our makers, heavy halo and many feather, no longer make our destiny from their palace nests, do we? Of note, it is believed that the continuum of D-ZK-7140 crossed the threshold into a completely doomed timeline within the first 48 hours of Esteton. A total loss of narrative potential inherent to doomed realities, as the compromised authors of this documentation here suggest, is in fact correlated to the surrender of control by 001-SWN entities native to the doomed reality. Past 48 hours, vast majority of surviving documentation is compromised to the point of practical incomprehensibility, much as with the reference to the angelic entity above. It's unclear whether the events described are literal or symbolic. At T-48 hours, our angel takes his seat in the Archon of the New Age. For a moment, the earth trembles. The seas do likewise. Things we've forgotten wash up ashore. At T-72 hours, the other angels now descend in hosts of 7 and 14. They join in celebration, but only to show us their dominion. Majestic are their crowns and vast by their words. They can destroy us. For now our world is unto them, but they do not. We are inspired by terror and awe. At T-96 hours, the last shackles of the old world begin to melt away. Now we may see clearly the bloody deceived, gnashing teeth who await us with starved hunger on the other side of the final verse. We also see opportunity, potential, undiluted, undeterred. We must go on. In the old world, we were falsehoods of meaning and meaningless lives. At least under the new law of blood, there is no deception. We are free to despair and to die. At T-120 hours, there's nothing left to fear here. At the end of the long river, there is nothing left to mourn. Today it will run with new blood for the first and last time. Today it will run for the first and last time. Tomorrow the river will run elsewhere. T-137 hours. Swan song and whale song collude in the final confrontation on the edge of the earth. It is creation and negation. Open any of our 7 eyes and see the grandeur of the lights. Open any of your 7 mouths and sing along. At T-440 hours, they all bloom. Every last one. We weep for the beauty. It has happened before, but never as unto this, first and final day of flowers. Beyond T-144 hours, the onset from the Esteton, there was no further communication made from the universe. The following document was decoded and translated by the joint effort of the SCP Foundation Department of Applied Esotericism and the International Center for the Study of Unified Thaumatology. I asked a superior about Protocol Alexandria to see if you can contribute an effort to the ICUSUT campus near you. Channelings of any claimed or actual akashic record are not acceptable as genuine translations of the historical or scientific material. Faust once made a deal with the devil. In exchange for his immortal soul, the mage Dr. Faust attained all worldly knowledge and ability which could possibly be imagined. Voss would become the most talented magician of his time, and the most talented alchemist of his time, and fortune would always look upon him favorably in the world of men. But none of this mattered, for in the kingdom of God, Voss was utterly corrupted. His soul always belonged truly to the Mephistopheles, and was so destined to that abominable court of angels fallen, for he was always a weak man. When I began to work for the mystery, it was purely to me a gift and blessing. The work I had hoped to perform was the final mystery of our age, and its aim to initiate the new, natural, more perfect order on Earth. The Ascended Masters teach of many ages in the history of the world before our own, and promise of many after. Future times of sunrise with cities and gold meadows of life, which make pitiful our own. It was any subject as an inhabitant of the world. As a servant of the unity of all faith, there is no religion higher than truth. To use my talents so man could wave goodbye to the Yuga of death and destruction and embrace the next world with open arms. I could do this in music, I knew, but in ritual, I'd require aid from without myself. And so I walked into my home, which I called the House of Aeon. Any outsider or archon would pity my cause. Custodians of the cosmos appeared in droves and offered which became my patrons, given the right price. One such patron was an ancient Morpheus unwritten, which taught itself eternal texts and said it was the living memory of its people, its own the Devas, blood-bound souls more ancient than the Vedas which told of them, in their old crown lands in service to their king, who resided in a faraway land on the other side of the Great Sea. It chronicled their deeds with fluid lifeblood. The eternal text promised me the automatic inspiration of creation outside time, which would guarantee completion of my work, even if I could not live to see it. Fool as I was, I took the contract. I signed away my name to the ancient emissary and entombed king. I was blinded by the majesty of my own work, so blinded that I could not see it was being taken away from me. This was years ago, when knowledge of the Devas was sparse in Europe. Archaeological findings is that people would only truly begin to come to light after the occurrences of Tashkent in 1909. I did not know much of them, beside that they represented profound change, a unified global order. What little historical information I did have informed me that the Empire of the Devas was a motherhood, matriarchal of nature, that they venerated the Earth Mother and the roots of which we all came. Regrettably, I did not see the ancient black magic which made the covenant which I brought myself into. After all, the Hindus, the Devas, were benevolent spirits. Sorry, I fucked that up. The Ascended Masters teach us that there is truth in all religion. Everywhere in the world, the Masters and the Christian mystics both teach us of all unity, that all is one, that good and evil are a dichotomy of falsehood. I suspected along these lines that they couldn't have been all so bad. A friend of mine was stationed in Vladivostok during the war in Japan. When he returned, I was already working on the mystery. He is an Orientalist by trade, and he would often interact with the locals and documented their ways of life while at his station. He was ultimately captured by the Japanese, a miracle that he managed to escape alive. When he recalled the story to me, he made clear the astonishment that his interrogators did not press him on the deployment of troops or naval forces, or that any other plans were relating to the military, but instead on his knowledge of a folk tale held by the natives of the Far East, the Evenkis and the Nivkis, and apparently the Japanese I knew as well, have long held a prophecy in an oral tradition that a vicious empire headed by a Crimson Khan would one day encroach ceaselessly from the west, until eventually the whole world was under his grasp and all subjects would be made to sing his final hymn of the earth. When fur trappers and merchants arrived, a story was altered to mention the imposition of a Cerise Tsar. To them, the myth had already become true. The Japanese officers questioned my associate about this very prophecy, and pressured him to confirm its veracity and provide specific details about where it could have been no possible way for him to know. I genuinely believed that Russia was the rebirth of the Devas, and that the Tsar was their Scarlet King, destined to end the world. It was then that I began to suspect overly what I subconsciously had feared all along. You see, my friend tells me on his further inquiry, he discovered that beliefs similar to those he encountered in the Far East are many are held by many of the natives of Central Asia. Apparently, they never changed the story when Russia arrived, and still fear the literal return of the Devas. Nowadays, modern anthropology seems to discover more and more similar stories each day, passed down from generations from the backcountry villages of Europe and the furthest tribes of Asia. The world around imagined that the Devas was no liberatory force. Every culture feared them. They were brutal, and the ruler not a wise but starlit king, a conqueror. Did I really use their rights for any good? Did I possibly best the devil in his own terms on the terms of his own bargain, and use that power without failing into its temptation? Last night in a dream, prophecy of vision, patron told me of lifeblood. My patron of lifeblood did not visit me as he usually does. Instead, his king did. I woke under a crimson sky, my dream self hanging precariously from the last intact of these 7 dark rust chains, and mine was the weight at which I broke it. As I walked through the streets of the old kingdom, through the ruins of every building, the thrice damned whispers of the Warren creeped into my mind to thank me for my services. And all the way, the imprisoned angels and archons of the realms hung in jagged bird cages, pallid and translucent from the emaciated hunger, their halos dimmed, and their wings swept spheres of no black and no bloody. Each was appalled by my presence as they saw me embark upon that long walk of shame. I regret with my every essence of myself to say that the work which I have dedicated my life will not erase our acceptance of the end of times. Damn gods above and below, now it will cause it. Another world will rise from the ashes, of course. Nothing is ruined forever, only remade. One of golden cities and fertile metals, it will not be. Foss once stood the days of hell and infamy. At that moment, the weight of his guilt crushed him, for he knew he had made a bargain, and it had to be upheld. This is a private journal entry from Alexander Scribbin, composer and occultist. The last bit of text in this article is titled A Parable of the Tree in the House of Death. And it goes as follows. Karmhashta Parahatal IX, Grand Lord of Arakesh, early graced visitors to the palace with his personal presence. His time was far too valuable, and the golden era was far too precious to risk putting in the eyeshot of a potential thief under any ordinary circumstances. But today was not an ordinary day. For generations, his kingdom had been brought to the brink of annihilation by the Crimson Khan of the North, Red Shah. For generations, they had just narrowly been avoided raiding and pillaging by his hordes, the host of the Black Devon, whose deceitful hive twins had broken more treaties than could be counted. Now, at last, his guests had witnessed their treachery firsthand. The lowly vagabond before him, hunched over, wrapped head to toe in ragged robes, bowed a traditional greeting. The Lord reciprocated, performing a bow in full honor and submission. Yisvilkar Solel Sage crowned, last chieftainess of the last tribe of the White Shagah, was no vagabond, at least. She had not always been. Born as much luxury as her embattled clan could afford, she learned early the burden of royalty in a nation gasping its desperate last breaths. Her people had hoped she was a demigod miracle child, a sort of messiah sent from the heavens about to save them. She was not. But royal or vagrant, she was a survivor. Now, she would be forced out with the people she could not rescue. Like their neighbors on the steppes, the Shita had embodied the great paradox of a total civilization, which was a nomadic horticulturalism. Unlike them, though, the Shita were neutral and less provoked. Their alchemy healed, their magic soothed, and altogether was their hebromancy a tranquil and solitary practice. Far before the tribes of the Deva had united under the timeless empire, before even the first brick of Devon was laid, they had outbattled the Shita near extinction in a gruesome half-millennia struggle. In the time since, the Deva had settled their empire and their remains on the reigns of their brothers, and for century after bloodstained century, the matriarchs hunted down the remaining tribes to finish the job. Now it seems they finally had. Great Arakesh welcomes you. The Grand Lord was always stalwart and sympathetic, stoic yet obviously pained, and I assure you, Your Highness, should I find any survivors among your people, she will open her gates and refuge to them as well. The deposed queen paused before thanking the gesture with a question. Why does fate favor you? Now the Davis have brought war again to the people of the fallen star, and nearby Eratish stands against tall invaders. I will contribute whatever I have to this arcane seal of yours to see the standard of my people continued in yours. At this, the war was just as bewildered as she. There lay no grand seal over Eratish besides the work of the Eratishans. No divine blessing, only their walls, their army, their magic. Those had by some miracle been enough to repel the hungering of the tide of crimson for now. He said as much as this, for it was all ELP to be said, I hate to say. So did the vagabond respond, I hoped this of my own country, but it was not so. We fought before we conquered. We fought but were conquered, as the Deva were more brutal in greater numbers than we. It is a common tale among my clan ages ago how we once allied our tribe under the same banner, but the clans who would be called Deva deceived us. So it was said, and landed upon the first strike of the 1,000-year war in our backs. It be true, in my experience, while I have tried many pieces with them, all broken. An old saying came from the lord of Eratesh's mind. A starlit king comes in many forms, but none are true. They deceived us both to our dooms, I fear. How shall I know what is to be the final doom and what not? She had defeated the effect of having lost a faith and a conviction once mighty. I will never know the worst plague when the worst plague has swept the land. For with each passing season I see worse still. I know nothing. I pray to my patrons, but now I pray to them instead, for they are lost. Pray for them instead. There was a long and mournful silence, for he knew what she had spoke. The Opaline Quadragonet, the 40-strong chief god of the Shira, had all been enslaved or slaughtered by the Deva and their own lord demons. Is there anything that can be done? Lord Parathal broke the silence. Perhaps he should not have. You know how many say their priestess tweens have won the fate of time itself, that their immortality is living covenant? This is true, the demons, even Eratash, will fall. The same primal fear consumed them both, that one day, whatever setbacks might temporarily forestall the inexorable expansion, the howling throne of Davon will either conquer the world itself or send with the 7 tons of razor-sharp poison the final rites which would destroy it. Perhaps, the vagabond said. But through their works, yours have learned themselves to endure the Crimson Khan's siege. May you, or may you not, be victors of that struggle. But with that gilded spear of Godbane wrought, heavens willing you and your grand mystics and demon keepers will have time to adapt, at the least. We must. The golden arrow was passed down to us, and our progeny since the gods fled the earth and assumed their seats in heavens. It is forever. Nothing under heaven is forever. Lord of Eratash Mighty, but so, too, is defeat. Even the end of all, never so final. The vagabond turned her back and made a great gesture of surrender into the onward horizon. The great out of the world will always hatch again. This is the wisdom of my people has taught me. Isvilkar, Soil Sage, Crown would not live in Eratash for many years. She was given a ritual bed of blessed soil that one day she breathed her last vital breath upon it, as was the tradition in her native land, so she could return to the earth. So she was buried on that starless night. Morning after, her body was drawn from the ritual bed, and an infant sapling had burst through the soil.